Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much for joining me here. Hope you're having a phenomenal day. We're taking a quick look here at Ethereum, Solana, SUI, XRP, and Cardano. And we're going to start off with some altcoin season index and just help you understand a little bit more about this, okay? So if you're new to the channel, welcome aboard. We'll be looking at liquidation delta heat maps as well as obviously the charts too. So important stuff. Be sure to stick around. Key level supports and resistances based off retracement are also going to be a factor here as well. So starting with altcoin season index, this is a pretty straightforward kind of just giving us perspective on which coins are doing better. To kind of make it really simple and easy, SUI and ETH are the two higher performing coins that we trade as a community, outside of Dog, Hat, and a few others, of course, that are outperforming. So in today's analysis, we'll be covering two of those important ones. The other three are lagging behind just below Bitcoin, essentially telling us they're either under or overperforming versus Bitcoin. All that being said, we had yesterday's historical value of 29 for the altcoin season index. This basically just tells us here that altcoins are starting to surge, altcoin dominance is increasing, and inevitably Bitcoin dominance is going down. The key takeaway here though is Bitcoin dominance is honestly going down slowly and the price of Bitcoin is going up. That does trigger and kind of show us that altcoin season's on the horizon. So don't get too ahead of yourselves and just start throwing money in the market, but also understand that that's what everyone else is doing. And it's important to recognize that dollar cost averaging on the way down right now is probably one of the best strategies you can take. Okay. All that being said, if you want to become a better trader, cryptocash.tech is the site, link down below. Let's start with Ethereum. Let's go ahead and look at the back-end liquidation data first and go from there. If you're not familiar, our Twitter, Telegram, and Discord have these heat maps available for you. But starting off with liquidation delta for Ethereum, we can see 3,100 and 2,900 are those two pockets of liquidation. So we could see a sweep of the upper range, but it does make a little bit more sense for our local low to be retested. So 2,900 would be a solid consideration for long if we lose 3,000. However, you got to recognize liquidation long delta is super high here for this coin. There's no reason to short against this. In all reality, you're better off waiting for a long versus trying to take a high risk short. Open interest does indicate here that roughly that 2,970 mark, which I'll highlight on the charts as well, essentially kind of tells us that we got a lot of support in this range. People are just adding a lot to their position in the 3,000, the low 3,000, upper 2,900 range. So that's an important thing to factor in here. Let's take a look at the chart and kind of recognize here, starting off with the daily time frame. And going from there, we're above all moving averages. Most coins are going to reflect this. We do have a macro resistance, by the way, at roughly 3,000, just a little bit above 3,000, 3,050. That was a previous low that held for a long time before we lost that bottom, okay, or dropped that bottom. Now it's a new top. We want to presume it's going to be a resistance. So better case scenario, we see the price action pull back to our 0.286 fib level, 236 fib level, and we're seeing that rough estimate of 2,850. So 2,850 to 2,900 based on liquidation and those local supports. Basically a previous high working as a new low. That should be a good consideration for long. Once more, this is just based on a better case scenario if the price pulls back there. There's also a fair value gap as low as 2,800. So in essence, 2,800 to 2,900 is the better area or range of motion for you if you want to consider a long or averaging into your position. That's kind of where Ethereum's at for right now. Taking a look here at Solana, we're going to start with the back-end liquidation data, of course, as per usual, and kind of recognize where we're at here. And starting here with the obvious, we can see that 155 to 160, as low as 145 is kind of that pocket of liquidation. This is the last 7 days worth of liquidation. So this tells us here, in the last 7 days, people feel pretty confident having liquidation events in the 160 to 145 range. So that's a good sign there, essentially letting us know there's a lot of support there, likely based on open interest, but also a decent amount of liquidation or liquidation delta here, implying further sustainability is pretty high right now. So I've been wanting to get in the 150s to low 160s range. If that comes to pass, I'm probably going to consider an entry, but between now and then, we have lost our open interest area here recently, that 160 resistance. We'll see on the charts here soon what that looks like. But the key takeaway here, it's at 165 to 170 is that local resistance. It was a previous high, and we have a decent amount of support in the 150 to 155 range. So heaven forbid we see 155 to 150, or I guess positively if we see that, then that would be a good DCA consideration for us. Let's jump into the charts and kind of just see what that tells us here. So we kind of zoom out, we can see, of course, our macro resistance at 185. That still exists from before, where we couldn't pass that threshold there back in May, and I think even previous we've had that retest there. But if we kind of zoom in here, we look the 200-day SMA is posing somewhat of a resistance here for us. So we could be very well in the beginning of a pennant type of pattern. Still very early to say. The CME gap has been filled officially, by the way. Just to jump over to Solana CME gap futures, we can see 162 to 163 was that previous gap. The last thing I forgot to mention, I apologize, I jumped over this, but there is a CME gap at 2850 to 2925 for Ethereum. So if you are interested in trading Ethereum, those again, good solid consideration for long that 2850 to 2900 range. Okay, back to Solana. Looking at the 4-hour time frame, here's something that's important to recognize. We're still above all moving averages. We're still seeing a stochastic swing to the upside, or correction to the downside, which is completely normal. But the key takeaway here is we have a nice kind of bullish convergence here, where our RSI is tapering down, and the price action is essentially creating higher highs. So generally speaking, when you see this, that's going to be a bullish type of convergence, or we're likely to bounce off 50 in the RSI. So an entry in the 160 to 165 range would seem like a practical consideration, pending Bitcoin doesn't continue to run to the downside, right? And we may see that. Just bear in mind too, if you didn't catch my Bitcoin analysis, Bitcoin is kind of in a range here, working well within the 118 to 120 range, but there's a lot of open interest at 118. So I'm thinking best case scenario for Bitcoin right now is 118 unless it fills this gap at 114, all right? So that's kind of where we're at there. Let's jump on over to SUI here and kind of see what's going on. This is the one that's really taking names, making waves, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's looking pretty awesome. Let's take a look here. So SUI's chart is pretty decent here in the overall sense. And what I mean by that, last 7 days of liquidation, we can see majority of all recent shorts here got destroyed. $4 is that local resistance. We see local shorts here at between $4 and $4.40. So better case scenario for another push to the upside, which is still very distinct likelihood. We'll see 440 as the next consideration. We'll look at some macro fib levels too to kind of understand if that's a realistic probability for us to see that upper range. But the key takeaway here is $3.20 to $3 even is that significantly large amount of not open interest, or at least there was previously, but more so liquidation in that range, okay? And we take a look at liquidation long delta, basically implying we have $1 billion in longs right now. There's no reason to short against this, even if it's overextended, which I don't know if you know this, but overextension means very little in crypto trading when we have these phenomenons that are occurring right now where everyone is just saying, shut up and take my money. That's really what's going on right now. So it's awesome, obviously, for those who are holding bags of SUI, which I am personally, but once more, all depends on who you are. Why don't you comment below, what is your average entry on SUI? I'm actually very curious about that. Mine is somewhere like the $2 range, basically just between a 190 and 210 is roughly where I got in pretty heavy. All that said though, open interest 320, 340, and 360 respectively are those three areas of consideration for a long if the price were to pull back, okay? And let's go ahead and quickly look at the daily time frame here and work our way down. If we look at the daily time frame, we can see this 0.618 fib level has a lot of confluence. What that basically just means is that we have a support range there in open interest. We already identified 340 to 360. We've got this 0.618 golden pocket fib level. It's also a previous high. So if we get lucky to see 360 again, that is an excellent consideration for a long. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and set an alert here to like the 365 range, just so I can get notified in case it may be worth taking a long position for our community. All right, so that's kind of the concept there, that we're looking pretty solid here. Overall sense, obviously we have a resistance range between $4 and $4.40. That is this upper resistance range here. And once more, that is based on a liquidation. That is the liquidation range. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at there. Let's take a look at XRP next and kind of see what's going on. XRP is overperforming, absolutely. It's a very, very strong, once it broke its $3 threshold, we've seen, or correction, it was 240. That is its strong resistance previously. That has since been destroyed, okay? We'll talk about that here in a minute, but $3 to 310 is that local resistance. So not just based on liquidation, we could see a quick spike up there, but there's a decent chance we see a pullback or capitulation in this range, especially if Bitcoin continues lower. Now, the overall sense here is that we have $2.5 billion in liquidation long delta. That's not something you want to try to short against. We have tons of open interest between 270, 280, 295. Those are three heavy concentrations. So honestly, if the price comes back to any one of those ranges, taking a long or averaging into those is optimal. I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you're part of my community, you'll see that whenever I set long entries and I like to average into my position, they're typically at open interest ranges, right? And that's the main reason why, is because it's oftentimes we're going to see a pivot or a bounce off those levels. So let's take a look here at XRP. see what's going on here. First and foremost, we've got a resistance range based on a previous high at 295. We have yet to close above that. However, obviously from a macro perspective, our highest point is that 330 to 340 range. So we're not quite into that resistance there, but good news is we have a lot of support here and confluence once more at that 260, 265 range based on open interest. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and update our playout chart on Twitter, Telegram, and Discord to reflect those new open interest areas. The key takeaway here is that we have tons of confluence at 235, so heaven forbid the price goes that low. Excellent area to consider averaging in. I've been talking about that being a great entry for a while, ever since we were actually in the 220 range. So good news is we took a ton of profit ourselves as a community for our XRP trade. So we took a nice whiff long profit there. BNB, XRP, there it is, 55%. In 12 days. So as you can see, we kind of average into that level quite significantly ourselves. Once again, took a nice profit on Ethereum as well. So once more, generally the coins that I cover here in my videos are coins I'm going to be taking trades with. That's the concept. I'm not jumping willy-nilly into coins I'm not familiar with. I know key levels and I stick within them, and those ranges are important things to work within. Either way you look at it, there's not much else to really note here. The macro perspective looks fantastic. There's no hidden divergences anywhere here. It's looking pretty solid, right? Last but not least, let's take a look here at Cardano, and let's go ahead and start with our playout chart first, and then we can talk about our fib extensions next. So starting with the back-end liquidation, we can see 77 to 78 cents is that local resistance range based on liquidation, or just place in which people feel comfortable. I'm not sure why, trying to short this coin. 68 to 66 cents is also that lower range there for us. Key takeaway here is that the liquidation long delta is still bullish. Generally not best to try to short against this. You want to keep your longs consideration open there. And also 70 to 75 cents is kind of that support range here for us. We're in the upper range of that. Now, the important thing I want to kind of point out here is the upper fib levels here. So if we end up breaking through this level, how much higher are we going to go? Well, the truth is we could very well see 96 cents to 101 as a potential consideration for the next target, because generally speaking, you'll see 1.272, 1.414 as those areas of consistency if the price continues to move past the local high. So if we break 86.5 cents, we could very well see that. All that being said, daily time frame, let's go ahead and summarize here. We're still under the 200-day SMA. Solana has the same scenario here, where we're in a position where we're trying to break through that resistance. Haven't officially yet. This is also that golden pocket potential resistance range. I love when prices reject at this level because it commonly comes back down to its 0.5 fib and continues higher. We have confluence here with our point of control and open interest we've already identified. That's a solid place to consider a long. So these are all good considerations here today. I'll probably highlight these areas of interest. I'll send that in a separate update for our community, of course. And if you want to become, again, a better trader, jump on over cryptocash.tag is a site where you can join us here. But overall, really liking what I see from the market here. These alt season indicators are very, very good signs here. And I would stick to the coins that are doing better than Bitcoin. These are the coins you want to stick with. Specifically, Dog Whiff Hat is one, and Bonk. Those are the two coins that I've been averaging into. And I think I'm averaged at 50 cents for Dog Whiff Hat. And I specifically, I'll have to come back to the Bonk. But good stuff nonetheless. Awesome. Thank you again so much for being an amazing part of my life. Don't forget to like the videos, comment below, join us on social media, and let me know where you're at with your position. And if you do like this new format, trying something different here, getting all my analysis done in one video instead of a bunch of different separate videos, seeing if that might help. But you're the reason why this is so awesome and so much fun. So thanks again for being a great part of my life. We'll look forward to seeing the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.